What happens when Keanu Reeves appears on Steve Harvey's show and reveals a life-changing moment that brings the famous host to tears? A simple interview transforms into a powerful testimony that leaves the entire audience speechless. And before we begin, let us know in the
comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with our global family. The studio lights blazed with their familiar warmth as the production team made final adjustments. Technicians checked microphones, camera operators confirmed angles, and makeup.
Artists delivered last-minute touches to the set. Behind the scenes, the energy was electric. Keanu Reeves, one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, would be today's featured guest on the Steve Harvey Show. In his dressing room, Steve Harvey adjusted his perfectly tailored suit. The rich purple fabric, complemented by a crisp white shirt and patterned tie. At 65, Steve carried himself with the confidence of a man who had
overcome tremendous obstacles to build his empire. From homelessness to Hollywood, his journey resonated with millions. The gold crucifix that hung around his neck caught the light as he leaned toward the mirror, a gift from his mother that he never removed, a constant reminder of faith that had carried him through his darkest moments. A producer knocked lightly on the door. 5 minutes, Mr. Harvey. Steve nodded,
took a deep breath, and whispered his customary prayer of gratitude. Another day, another opportunity to bring joy to others. Another chance to use his platform for something greater than himself. Across the hall, Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his own dressing room, declining the offer of additional makeup. At 59, his face carried the distinguished lines of a
life lived with intensity and purpose. Unlike many Hollywood stars, Keanu had developed a reputation for genuine humility and kindness that set him apart in an industry often dominated by ego. The production assistant had explained that today's interview would focus on Keanu's recent film projects, his motorcycle company, and perhaps touch on his philanthropic work. Though Keanu typically avoided discussing the
millions he had donated to children's hospitals and cancer research over the years. What no one knew, not even the meticulous producers who had researched every aspect of both men's careers, was that today's conversation would veer dramatically from the planned topics into something far more profound. As the familiar theme music filled the studio, Steve Harvey strode onto the stage with his trademark energy,
greeting the audience with wide gestures and a brilliant smile that concealed the early morning exhaustion he'd been fighting. Today, Steve announced after his opening monologue, "We have someone special, a man who's been called the internet's boyfriend, but who's so much more than that. He's an actor whose films have inspired
generations, a philanthropist who gives without seeking recognition, and by all accounts, one of the genuinely good souls in Hollywood. Please welcome Keanu Reeves." The audience erupted as Keanu walked on stage, dressed simply in black jeans and a dark blazer over a plain t-shirt. His hair fell just past his shoulders, and his beard was neatly trimmed. He waved briefly to the audience, visibly uncomfortable with the overwhelming adoration, before embracing Steve with genuine
warmth. "Thank you for having me," Keanu said as they settled into the plush interview chairs, his voice characteristically soft yet resonant. "Man, it's my pleasure," Steve replied, leaning forward with genuine interest. "You know, before we get into your new film, I gotta say something. In an industry where we hear so many stories about bad behavior, your name always comes up differently. People say Keanu gave away
millions to the special effects team on The Matrix, or Keanu bought a homeless man food. What makes you different?" Keanu shifted slightly, uncomfortable with praise, yet thoughtful about the question. "I don't think I am different," he responded after a moment. "We're all just trying to navigate life, you know. I've been fortunate. And when you've experienced both loss and good,
Fortune? You realize how quickly things can change for anyone. Steve nodded, recognizing the genuine humility. That's exactly what people connect with. You've never lost touch with reality. Despite all your success, the conversation flowed naturally into Keanu's recent projects, his passion for motorcycles, and his thoughts on his unexpected cultural icon, status. The audience laughed at his self-deprecating humor and leaned forward during his more
philosophical reflections. It was precisely the engaging, entertaining segment the producers had envisioned. Then, during what should have been a transition to the next talking point, something shifted. Keanu's gaze fell on the crucifix, hanging from Steve's neck, and an unplanned question formed on his lips. "That cross you wear," Keanu said, gesturing slightly. "You've had it a long time." Steve's hand instinctively
moved to the gold pendant, touching it with reverence. "My whole career. My mother gave it to me. It's a reminder that faith isn't just for Sundays. It's for the trenches, for the hard days." Keanu nodded slowly, his expression changing subtly. The studio seemed to quiet, as if the audience collectively sensed a shift in the atmosphere. "Faith in the trenches," Keanu repeated thoughtfully. "That resonates with
me, Steve, an experienced interviewer who recognized genuine moments when they appeared, set aside his prepared questions. How so? Keanu took a deep breath, his eyes briefly glancing off stage, as if checking whether he should continue down this unexpected path. Then he looked directly at Steve. "Can I tell you something I've never shared publicly before?" The question hung in the air, in the control room.
Producers exchanged glances. This wasn't in the script, but they knew better than to interrupt authentic television when it was unfolding. "Of course," Steve answered, leaning forward slightly. Keanu nodded, gathering his thoughts. "A few years ago, I was in a really dark place," he began, his voice quieter but still carrying through the microphone. "I've experienced loss in my life. My daughter was stillborn. And then, not long after, I lost Jennifer. Her
mother. And while that was years ago, grief doesn't follow a schedule. The audience was completely silent now, collectively holding their breath. "There was a night," Keanu continued, "when I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't find any reason to keep moving forward. Everything felt empty. I was just scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to distract myself from thoughts that were getting darker by the hour."
Steve listened intently, all showmanship set aside, replaced by genuine presence. And then Keanu said, "I came across a video. It was you, Steve. You were speaking at an event talking about purpose, about how pain can become your ministry, about how God doesn't waste experiences even when they break us." Steve's expression changed, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You were wearing that same crucifix."
Keanu continued, gesturing towards Steve's chest. "And something about how you spoke like you'd actually lived through darkness. Not just read about it. It cut through everything else. I watched that clip 3 times that night." The studio remained eerily quiet. Camera operators looked at each other, amazed at what they were capturing. The next morning, Keanu said, "For the first time in weeks, I got out of bed with a purpose. Not because I suddenly
had answers, but because you had articulated what I needed to hear. That being broken doesn't mean being finished." Steve sat motionless, visibly moved. His hand had found the crucifix again, fingers closed around it like an anchor. "I've never told anyone that story," Keanu admitted. "But seeing you today, that cross catching the light just like it did in that video, I realized I needed to thank you. Your words reached
someone you never knew was listening, at exactly the moment they needed to hear them." Steve tried to speak, but found he needed a moment. When he did find his voice, it was thick with emotion. "Man, I don't even know what to say." I was just speaking from my heart that day. That's exactly why it mattered, Keanu replied. It wasn't polished or scripted. It was real. You weren't trying to reach me specifically, but that authenticity, it saved me that
Night. A tear escaped down Steve's cheek, which he made no attempt to hide or wipe away. The control room remained silent. No one dared cut to commercial or redirect this moment. You know, Keanu continued, his voice gentle, but carrying a depth that filled the studio. People see you as an entertainer, a comedian, a host. But Steve, I think you're
something else too. What's that? Steve asked quietly. A minister in disguise, Keanu said with such sincerity that several audience members audibly responded with emotion. The way you carry that cross isn't just for show. It's a beacon for people like me, who might be sitting alone in the dark, needing to be reminded that light still exists. Steve shook his head slightly,
overwhelmed by the unexpected testimony. I'm just trying to make it like everybody else, he managed to say. That's exactly what makes your message powerful, Keanu responded. You're not standing above anyone. You're walking alongside them, sharing your own scars as proof that healing is possible. The atmosphere in the
studio had transformed completely. This was no longer an entertainment segment, but something sacred. A moment of raw humanity unfolding beneath the bright lights, designed for much more superficial exchanges. Your words that night, Keanu continued. I remember them exactly. Sometimes your pain becomes your purpose. Sometimes the very thing that broke you
becomes the thing God uses to make you a beacon for others. Steve's eyes widened in recognition. That speech in Dallas, 3 years ago. Keanu nodded. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days ago. Steve was openly crying now. No pretense of composure. I remember giving that talk. I was going through my own struggles that week. Didn't even want to be there. Thought about canceling. But you didn't, Keanu
said. And because you showed up, even when you didn't feel like it, your words traveled beyond that room, beyond that moment. They found me when I needed them most. Steve took a deep breath, trying to center himself. God works in ways we can't imagine, he said finally. That's exactly it, Keanu agreed. I think sometimes we're vessels without realizing it. You thought you were
just fulfilling an obligation that night. But you were actually delivering exactly what someone else needed. Someone you'd never meet. Steve looked at Keanu with newfound connection. Why tell me this now after all this time? Keanu smiled gently. Because today, seeing that cross around your neck, watching how you connect with people, I realized something. Maybe my
purpose in coming here wasn't just to promote a film. Maybe it was to complete the circle, to let you know that when you think your words are falling into emptiness, they're actually landing exactly where they need to. By now, audience members were openly weeping. Crew members stood transfixed. Even the director in the control room made no attempt to steer the segment back
to lighter territory. Steve finally found his composure and leaned forward. You know, in all my years doing this show, I've never had a moment like this. Never expected it. Especially not from, he gestured toward Keanu with admiration. Someone like you? Someone like me? Keanu questioned with genuine curiosity. Yeah, man. A Hollywood
star. Most celebrities come here to promote something, to maintain their image. You just came here and bared your soul. Keanu shook his head slightly. I think that's the problem with how we see each other sometimes. We create these categories, celebrities, hosts,
audiences, when really we're all just people trying to find meaning, trying to connect, trying to help each other through the darkness. Steve nodded, recognition flashing in his eyes. That's exactly what I was talking about that night in Dallas. How we're all just walking each other home. Exactly, Keanu affirmed. And sometimes the people who seem like they have it all together are the ones struggling the most in silence. There
was a pause heavy with significance. Before Keanu continued, I want to tell you something else, Steve. Something that might change your life, the way you changed mine that night. The studio held its collective breath. Steve, still visibly moved, but now intensely curious, leaned in. I'm
listening. Keanu took a deep breath. You asked earlier what makes me different in Hollywood. The truth is, I'm not different. I've just learned partly through your words that night that what matters isn't success or fame. It's how we care for each other, especially when no cameras are rolling. He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. That night, after watching your talk the third time, I made a decision. I
established a private foundation that funds childhood cancer research. I didn't put my name on it. I've never talked about it publicly until now. Steve listened, captivated, and the first major research grant it funded, Keanu said, was to the hospital where your nephew was treated. Steve froze, visibly shocked. His nephew's battle with leukemia had been a private family struggle, not something he discussed on his
show. How did you? Steve began. In your talk, Keanu explained, you mentioned praying for a child in your family fighting leukemia. You didn't name him, but you spoke about sitting in a hospital waiting room holding that crucifix, begging for a miracle. It moved me deeply. Steve nodded, remembering Marcus, my sister's boy. When I started the foundation, I asked them to find the
most promising research happening for childhood leukemia. They came back with 3 options. One was led by Dr. Catherine Reynolds at St. Jude's. Steve finished, his voice barely above a whisper. That's where Marcus was treated. They had a breakthrough treatment that year. Keanu nodded. The foundation funded her work. Not because I knew about your nephew specifically, but
because your words had planted that seed. Your pain became part of my purpose. Steve stood suddenly, unable to remain seated under the weight of this revelation. Without speaking, he opened his arms. Keanu rose and stepped into the embrace. The audience erupted in applause, many on their feet, tears streaming freely. In the control room,
producers exchanged looks of amazement. This was television. They couldn't have scripted if they'd tried. Raw, authentic human connection happening before their eyes. When the 2 men finally separated, Steve wiped his face and looked directly at Keanu. I don't even know what to say, man. You don't need to say anything, Keanu replied gently. Just keep
being who you are. Keep wearing that cross not as a symbol, but as a reminder that sometimes faith is the only thing that isn't pretending. In Hollywood, we follow scripts, he continued. On camera, everything is edited, controlled, perfected. But faith has no director. It demands truth. Steve nodded, profoundly moved. You're right. Faith isn't glamorous. It doesn't win awards, but it saves
people. Quietly, deeply. That's exactly it, Keanu agreed. And sometimes the people it saves never know where their lifeline came from. I never planned to tell you about watching your video that night, but seeing you today, seeing that cross catch the light, just as it did when I was in my darkest moment, I realized some circles need to be completed. Steve took a deep breath, regaining his composure, though the emotion remained evident in his
eyes. He turned to the audience who sat in reverent silence. I've had a lot of moments on this stage, he said, his voice cracking slightly. But this is something else entirely. He closed his eyes briefly, then lifted his head. Would you all join me for a moment? Without explanation, he bowed his head. Keanu did the same. Throughout the studio,
audience members followed suit, heads lowering in a spontaneous moment of collective gratitude and recognition. When Steve looked up again, his expression had transformed. The polished host had given way to something more essential, a man humbled by the mysterious ways in which words spoken from pain could travel to heal another's wounds. "Thank you," he said simply to Keanu. "No, Kanu,"
replied. "Thank you for reminding me that sometimes the most important things we do are the ones we never see the impact of until today." The director finally found her voice through the headsets. "We need to break for commercial." But before the cameras cut away, Keanu and Steve shared one more look of profound understanding. Two men who had
journeyed through their own valleys of shadow, now standing together in an unexpected moment of light beneath the studio's glare, but illuminated by something far more profound. And as the show continued, after the break, returning to questions about movies and projects and plans, something had fundamentally shifted in the studio. The audience had
witnessed not just an interview, but a testimony to how human connection transcends celebrity, how words spoken from authentic pain can travel across time and space to reach exactly who needs them most. Later that evening, after the studio had emptied and the lights had dimmed, Steve Harvey
stood alone on the stage, his fingers once again finding the crucifix around his neck. The conversation with Keanu had shaken him to his core. The realization that his words spoken during one of his own darkest periods had become a lifeline to someone he'd never expected to reach. A maintenance worker approached, pausing respectfully when he noticed Steve deep in
thought. "Powerful show today, Mr. Harvey," the man said quietly. Steve turned, seeing not just a staff member, but another soul on the journey. "It really was," he agreed. "Reminded me why we're here." "To entertain," the man asked. Steve shook his head slowly, his hand still resting on the cross. "No," he said thoughtfully, "to remind each other. We're not alone in the dark." As he
finally left the stage, Steve carried with him not just the weight of that day's revelation, but also the lightness that comes with purpose, reaffirmed. Celebrity and fame would fade, but the human connections formed in moments of shared vulnerability, those were eternal. And somewhere in Los Angeles, Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his home, feeling a sense of completion. A circle that had begun in his darkest hour had finally closed. Words that
had once saved him had now been acknowledged, honored, and returned to their source. In a world of carefully constructed images and curated personas, something authentic had broken through. That night, two men from very different worlds slept more peacefully, each carrying the profound truth that had emerged unexpectedly beneath the bright lights. That sometimes we are vessels without knowing it, that pain
can become purpose, and that faith, real faith, is the one light that the darkness cannot overcome. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that their words matter, that their
presence makes a difference even when they can't see it. And let us know in the comments, has a stranger's words ever reached you at exactly the right moment? Your story might be the very thing someone else needs to hear today. Dear friends, all the information is taken from online.